Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the AUD podcast channel. I'm your host Khalid Abullaban. We are honored to have Ms. Dana Abullaban as our guest on the show today. Dana is a journalist, TV presenter, writer and podcast host and a fellow AUD alumni. Over the past 10 years she has worked across all forms of media, including producing multiple shows on NBC. She is someone who is incredibly passionate about storytelling and believes that no matter the medium, we must always try and convey the human element in every story. In this episode, you'll learn how social media has changed how we consume content and news, how traditional media is changing, her advice to content creators, and the authenticity of storytelling in news. Please join me in welcoming to the show Ms. Dana Abullaban.
Thank you so much for having me, Khalid.
Thank you for your time. So Dana, funny enough, me and you were alumni here. We're alumni from here, and we're actually in uni together at the same time. And we were talking earlier about how we never met, which is weird because AUD is kind of like a big/small community, you know. Also, when I was doing my research, it's funny that you're working with Rising Giants. So I've had Basil on my show. And and I saw you spoke to Farah recently as well, and Farah's been on my show as well. So it's funny how there's a lot of connections, but we never met. But hey, that happens. That happens in Dubai sometimes.
We met at the right time.
Exactly. There you go. Yeah. So, Dana, I know you're a journalist, a producer, a TV presenter, and you worked in lots of different areas of media, and you currently do as well. So I wanted today to kind of focus on the changing landscape of media, how things have shifted from traditional to all these new platforms and so on. And I think your experience in that world would provide a very interesting perspective on how things go. But before we get into everything, why don't you give all of us a little bit of background about yourself, and we'll take it from there.
Okay, I'm Dana Abullaban. I am a journalist. This is how I like to
describe
myself, because everything I do is part of journalism. It all falls under journalism. I currently work for NBC Group. I produce a female talk show, Kalamna Wa'am. I work in the morning show. I present segments on culture and books and movies. And I graduated from AUD 2012, Mass Comm, concentration in journalism. I then rejoined AUD for my master's. So I got my MA in Leadership and Innovation in Contemporary Media in 2019. I graduated 2019. What else do? I teach at SAE Dubai. I teach media courses, media studies, cultural perspectives. And I have my own podcast. I will talk about it a little bit more later.
Sure.
I think that's it. I do so many things.
You do.
But I always lose track.
Yeah, that's a lot, man. Mashallah. And
thank you.
So, in everything you just said, the one thing that keeps coming up is media. Undergrad was media. Even as a lecturer, media. You work in media. Okay. And it's very rare, I find at least, that people who have gone down that path, maybe at university, actually continue into the profession that they studied. For example, me, I did economics and finance. I haven't spent one day working in either. So it's just funny how things work out. But I wanted to start by asking, where does this passion for media come from? Why media?
I've always liked telling stories. I was known since I was a child. I like to gather the kids in the family and just make up stories and come up with stories and play with puppets. So I always liked telling stories. I never liked being on camera or under the spotlight. I was such a shy child and all throughout my adolescent years, but I always liked telling stories. And funny enough, my parents did not know of this. They thought it was just a hobby. Because they had different ambitions for me. They wanted me to become a doctor or an engineer. So I kept to myself because I didn't know what this could lead to. However, when I graduated school, I'm like, this is it. I want to be a journalist. I should speak up about this. And I joined AUD and I studied journalism. And everything I do falls under my passion, which is storytelling. And because today we're covering how the media landscape is changing in this podcast, this is the only thing that will never change. We will always be telling stories. The way we tell stories is different, but this concept is very popular Everybody likes to either tell stories or hear stories, no matter what these stories are, be it news, entertainment, film, series. This is the common denominator, more or less.
Interesting. So, and I think that's a very good point, taking it back also to, you know, history and stuff. What's the thing? How did we get here? How did information get passed on? Stories. Stories are the history that, you know, brought us to where we are today. And it's really interesting that you talk, that you say storytelling is the essence of everything that's changing. So then let's dive into storytelling. Now, like you said, there's lots of different ways you can tell a story, but in terms of like the essence of a good story, like what are the pieces that need to be in place for you to look at, okay, that's a complete, wholesome story that anyone listening could probably take in and understand?
Obviously, there are differences. It depends on the format. If it's told as a news story, as a report, if it's entertainment, if it's serious, if it's a series, if it's a movie, everything is a story. So it depends on the type of story. However, I feel like the passion and the honesty.
Honesty.
These two things, yes. Even if you're an actor, you have to be honest about your feelings, even if the situation is not real. So honesty and passion, because these are the two things people can easily read through. Do not take people lightly. They can tell if you're being honest or dishonest, if you're passionate or you're just doing it for the fame, for the money. It shows.
It shows. So the honesty, and is it also, I guess, authenticity that I'm not. And I love what you said about, even as an actor, you're trying to convey honesty, even though you're putting on a character, because there's that famous saying, you know, the audience is, you know, smart, you know, they can read through all this. So how do I tell a story in an authentic way? Because I'm going to bring this into the work you do. So I've had a previous journalist on the podcast before. She was also an AD alum, which is funny. And we were talking, and she worked for, I think, a Sharq, and then for NBC or something, or BBC, can't remember exactly what it was. And we were talking about how each news agency, for example, will convey a story in a different way. There's that agenda that this is the emotional impact I want the story to have. This is how I want people to feel.
Yeah.
And we discussed how, for example, in the Arab world, you might get one take. But if you go like to the Western world, you might get a completely different take of that same story because I have different objectives. So bringing it into, I guess, the news area, how can you be authentic if at the same time I'm trying to convey a specific message?
Okay. Every organization has an agenda. Every human being has an agenda. So we have agendas as well as individuals. And no matter how hard you try to be as neutral as possible, you can never be neutral. We're human. So your question is, how can we be authentic, although we are applying an agenda?
Yes.
You can always look for the human in the story, the way you tell this story. I do understand that every journalist working in an organization has red lines, rules, and regulations. However, in each story, even if you're just, mentioning numbers of casualties, these people are humans in all angles. Whether you tell the story on NBC or ABC or BBC, these people will still be human, no matter who they are or where they come from. So going back to that human and that human inside of you, as you tell this story, this is how you're being authentic. I'll give you an example.
Sure.
So I presented and produced a news bulletin on NBC for 5 years. And in the beginning, I used to struggle between my personal feelings and what I say on air.
Exactly, yeah.
Especially that as a news anchor, you're supposed to be very neutral, very serious. And that was at a time when ISIS was in Iraq and in Syria. And we were watching heartbreaking news, heartbreak after heartbreak, people having to leave their homes because ISIS took over. So it was an emotional wreck for me, going every day, every morning, just to read these news as if these people are nobody. However, I trained myself, to tell the story with feelings, with emotion, but not to impose my emotions on the audience. Who am I, one person, talking to hundreds of thousands or millions, to impose my own feelings? If I'm sad about this story, this is just one person. So I always say that the journalist should never take themselves too seriously. Like, you are doing a job now. You're not the only person telling this story, but maybe you will be the person who tells this story in a way where people feel something for the things that you're saying. So that was what I focused on. And because I had the pleasure of producing the bulletin as well, I would choose these human stories that no agenda would say no to, and add them. They would give flavor and they would give humanity to the bulletin. So, yeah.
That's really...
It's a challenge.
Yeah, I can imagine, because it's really interesting how... I think you made a really good point that you trained yourself to not... to convey the feeling of the human nature of that story or whatever has happened.
But not to impose my opinion.
Yes, exactly. And I think that, and kind of like what you said a little bit earlier, is that we all have our own agendas and biases, and we're all human. So were there ever times where for example, you produced it, you're ready, and now you're about to present it, that in the middle of, while you're saying that, you have this voice in your head that's like, oh, I really want to say this, or but like I can't, or how, you know, I can imagine that can happen. Yeah,
it happens. So yeah, but you learn how to be a professional and how to put all these things aside and just do the job. It's not easy being a news anchor. I look at the news anchors that have been doing this for years and years, and I can't imagine myself doing it. Like, I feel like I stopped at the right time.
Oh, so now you've stopped.
I don't do news anymore.
Oh, okay. And could you tell us a little bit, what was your reasoning behind that?
It was COVID, and I felt like it was a dark place for most people during the lockdown, and we didn't know, is the world going to end?
Yeah, true.
Are we going to live another day?
Yeah, true.
What's after COVID? Is life ever going to be the same again? And I felt like I could do so much if I focus on what brings us together as humanity. Politics in the past decade or so has only been pulling us apart.
Yeah.
In the region and around the world, we see this every single day. And I felt like, am I going to be able to make a difference in the news industry? No matter how hard I try, because of the constraints of the job, there's only so much you can do. So I felt like if I deviate from politics and focus on something that can put us all together around the same table, from different religions, from different opinions, from different countries, cultures, then I should do that. And that's what I'm focusing on. That's why I'm focusing on arts, books, movies, human feelings, because they bring us all together. I feel like politics is only pulling us apart.
I couldn't agree with you more on that. And I think your timing also, given that COVID was a very unknown, dark time for so many people in the world, you probably, sounds like you made the right decision to, stop
It was the right decision for me.
Yeah. For yourself.
Yeah.
For yourself, yeah.
I salute everybody who does it. I watch the news daily. I enjoy it. I know it's one of the hardest jobs in the world, especially because of the nature of the news that we tell, especially in our region, unfortunately. It's not like you're presenting a news bulletin in Canada where everything is cool and you talk about the weather or a couple of thefts. It's
cold again today, yeah.
Exactly. So it's a very hard job. I never say never. So maybe one day I would do it again.
Sure.
But I don't feel like it's any time very soon.
Okay, and you know what, that's fair enough. And kind of something you said earlier that, you know, how you felt like you were an emotional wreck in the early stages when you were first, presenting until you trained yourself to get better at that. Me personally, I don't really like watching news anymore because what I realized is it's interesting. I want to be informed, but I don't want to watch the news. I don't know how to explain it because I've never turned on the TV and I'm like, some disaster has happened in the world, and honestly, like, to continue just watching that in my head, I'm like, oh, this, the
I
world is
completely
just bad,
understand.
so it's not serving me to do this
Yeah.
anymore. Maybe there's other
What can
ways
you
I
do
can
about
get.
it, even if you're informed?
Exactly.
I totally understand what you're going through, and this is partially because of social media and new media. Because even if you don't watch the news bulletin, you can't escape the news. It follows
True.
you on Instagram. It follows you to Twitter. So I totally understand when somebody that's not from the industry, so watching news is not part of their job, they wouldn't choose to watch the news. They can easily check the headlines on Twitter, safeguard themselves from watching all the horrors or listening to politicians and analysts talking in depth about something. Now you have the option to just know what's happening and control the amount of news you can get. So for example, an earthquake happened. You know the headline. You don't have to watch a full news bulletin and watch every single scene. You can control the amount of news that you're bombarded with a little bit more on social media.
That's interesting. That's something I've never thought of, because you're right that
You have an option.
You do, and I think that's it. You have an option, or let's say like a choice now. I can invest as much of myself as I want into this story or into that piece.
But I feel like it's very schizophrenic, honestly.
It is.
It always astonishes me, sometimes in a very bad way, when I'm on Instagram and I'm looking at somebody's story. As a journalist, as a human, one story is a dinner, another one is a song, the third one is about poverty in Africa, the fourth one is asking people to donate, and then back to the party at night. I know that people don't do it on purpose.
Yeah.
And because you post stories at, like, there are 12 hours in the day where you're awake. So you're posting at different times. You have different feelings. But when you watch the whole package together, it's like, what?
Yeah.
How can I believe that you care about this?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, that's true. And it's funny. So I read the article you actually wrote exactly about this back in 2017, and you were talking about how, with exactly what you just described, and how it blurs the lines between what's real, what's not, what should I care about, and what shouldn't I. So now I feel with all these platforms, although we have a choice, our brains are more cluttered than ever. So I guess the question is, and even if I genuinely wanted to go out and like find information, for everything I find that supports maybe my belief, there's an equal thing and just the same amount that, says the complete opposite. So my question is, and when I asked Sarah this, when we recorded, it was tough to find, the right answer. We both struggled to like get to something concrete. I don't think there is a specific answer. So let me ask you, Dana, what would you say about how do we cut through the noise? How can we cut through the noise and actually get to, maybe we won't get the full truth, but maybe as close as possible?
The truth has 1,000 angles. This is something we need to make peace with. My truth is different from yours, and there's something that I believe in. People believe what they want to believe. That is a psychological fact. That is a fact of life. You are more likely to believe the news or to be moved by the stories that touch you personally. It depends on your values. It depends on your life experiences, on how you were brought up, on your education. There are so many factors. How many people are in the world? 7 billion? I think there's 7 billion truths. So no, you can never get to the truth. However, I totally agree. The clutter that we are bombarded with every day on social media makes it very hard to kind of find the balance and decide what to care about, what not to care about. I think it's a conscious decision. We're still in the early years of social media and new media. With time, I believe it will regulate. It will become not an obsession, but just a part of life. Remember when TV was an obsession?
Yeah.
When kids, I was a kid and I was glued to the TV.
We all were.
Now it's no longer an obsession for the kids of this generation. The same thing will happen to social media with time. So we need to be patient. Whatever is happening is normal, although I do believe it will have serious repercussions on the coming generations if the parents are not very strict when it comes to technology and gadgets and so forth. Because the things kids are seeing today were things we could never see in our age.
True.
So I believe time, just like time heals all wounds, time will regulate these platforms. I don't think it will take more than the next 5-6 years. We will see a change, in my perspective.
Interesting. I'm curious, what's the reason you think it's coming? I guess that's pretty soon, I would say.
It doesn't need like 10-20 years in my perspective for these platforms to regulate, because we are already seeing like countries like the UAE are regulating social networks. If you're an influencer, you have to be registered. So with time, I'm seeing positive things are happening. You have YouTube Kids and YouTube for adults. Even the platforms are regulating. So I don't think it will take much longer for people to even get used to the presence of these networks, and they're no longer an obsession. You choose who to follow, you choose which news to care about. There are easy tools that you can apply on iPhone or on any other phone. You can limit the time you spend on social media. So you can put a limit of 1 hour, 2 hours. Please don't put 3 hours, 1 to 2 hours, and the phone would ring and notify you that your time is up. So I feel like, and I'm not against these networks, I think they're amazing.
Yeah.
So many talents have found their way through them. They kind of democratized media.
Yeah, they have. That's
because
true.
Before, as a journalist, I had to work in a news or in a network to get to work. That's it. Not to become famous, just to get to work. But now everybody can have a platform, and that's amazing. However, that's not to say, I just wanted to say that I'm not against these social networks. However, with time, I think, as I told you, it will normalize.
Yeah. And I think you made a really good point. I guess things that I was aware but didn't pay attention to when you mentioned like the YouTube for kids and adults, and regulating, time, regulating, things you can do.
Even TikTok.
That's my, that's my guilty pleasure, I must say.
Yeah?
I just, besides the fact that it's addictive, let's not play around. I like it.
I
have a
addictive.
very serious reason for listening to it. But nowadays, and this is kind of what I want to touch on a little bit, is now there's podcasts, there's TikTok, there's Twitter, there's so many ways to consume new information and news. And I wanted to ask you, because you've been working at NBC for about almost 10 years, which is wow. So for almost 10 years, so you've been working in the traditional model, right? And you still are. But at the same time, now you also have like your own podcast and so on. So you have this new medium, you're involved in the new medium as well. So I have like 1,000 questions just on this specific on this specific point. But first, I wanted to understand from you, since you are on both sides of the fence, what's your perspective on it? Do you see it move? Do you see that traditional media is dying and this is the new way that in the future we're all going to consume information? Or will traditional always have a place no matter, even the next 10, 20, 30 years?
I feel it's a bit melodramatic to say it's dying.
Okay.
But let's look at radio.
Okay.
There was a point where radio was the only medium where people got the news, they even listened to shows, to music, When television came, everybody said that radio is going to die. But radio still survives up until today. There is a more advanced version of it, which is podcasts and online radio and so forth. But radio still exists to a certain extent. Same goes for television and the new media that's coming after. Do I believe that television will have the same value in the next 5 years? No, it is declining. And I do work in a traditional organization, but we did change and shift so much to so that we're not extinct, even if television is extinct. So in NBC, they're investing so much on Shahid, which is the VOD platform similar to Netflix and Hulu and so forth. So a lot of money is going into that. And even the way we produce our traditional shows, our shows that air on linear television, has changed drastically. Okay. We are thinking of the youth. We are thinking of curating content similar to what we showcase on television for social media. It's very different. For example, you have Instagram, Reels, Short. So we try, as we ideate, to think about topics that are social media friendly, Instagram friendly, TikTok friendly, even create extra content behind the scenes that is social media friendly. So we did change. We are changing. And the amount of investment that is going to Shahid and the amount of success it's getting is showing me that NBC as a company, for example, will never be extinct because they have Shahid and they're investing so much in social media and in new media. Will television ever die completely? I wish no. For one thing.
Sure.
Because consuming content today is a very individual, lonely experience. You watch series on your own. You consume content on social media on your own. There are, for example, 200 series on Netflix. Very rarely are you watching the same thing with your friends. So this experience of friends or family watching together, I don't want this to die. You know what I mean? And no matter, okay, I might have my friends over and we're watching a movie on Netflix, but come on, most of the time, we're watching things on our own.
That's true.
Let's go back to our childhoods. That was not the case.
No.
There was this one series that everybody's watching at home, a cartoon. So I'm nostalgic, yes, but I don't want to go back in time. I know we cannot go back in time.
Yeah.
We can't undo all the developments. However, I do believe TV will still exist for live shows, format shows, any experience that is live that cannot be replicated anywhere else. I don't know. We don't know. We're scared. I'm not scared because, as you said, I'm part of this new world. I do have my own podcast. I did my master's in new media. So I am aware of this world, but I worry how the shift in the medium where people get the information or consume the content, what it will do to us as a society. Because, as Marshall McLuhan said, the medium is the message, and where you get the message can change the way you think, can change the way you feel. I feel like today, for example, we're more immune to tragedy because we see so much tragedy. We're kind of more desensitized to violence because we're seeing it all the time. A lot of people have an unrealistic views on life and lifestyle because they see Instagram models or rich people on Instagram just showcasing their lifestyle, and they're one day on a yacht, another day in a European country, and in our region most of the people can't afford this life. So you have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, that are scrolling through Instagram feeling sorry for themselves. So the medium, that's the point I was trying to make. The medium does change society. So I'm just worried what will happen to society when traditional media is game over and it's all new media.
So many really interesting points. First of all, about how, and something I didn't, I guess, realize how individualistic it is in the way we consume our content
Slowly.
now. Yeah, and I didn't I never realized that, but now that I'm like thinking about myself, I'm like, yeah, either I'm listening to a podcast alone or I'm watching TikTok alone. Like it's not a communal thing that maybe growing up like in the house, if the news is on TV, we're all watching the news, you know. And also how companies like NBC or traditional media is getting into is adapting and changing to hold, I guess, the essence of how traditional it is, however applying that to different mediums now, so that there's, I guess, synergy on kind of on both sides. And you can, I guess, if you're more traditional, you can go watch the news typically, or, you know, people more like maybe our generation, TikTok, podcasts,
something
and so
for everyone.
Something for everyone, exactly. And I think that to survive, that is the right approach, because the way things are going is just, it feels that it's just being pushed. Like there's more platforms, and now with like AI coming into this and like ChatGPT and all of this, like it's just there's
it's a Black Mirror episode.
It really is. And it's funny how some of the episodes that we watched have actually come true in like the real world, which is very scary. I don't know how they predict these things, but anyway, we're not going to dive into Black Mirror. But coming back to what you're talking about, so what I wanted to understand is, so you're in terms of how you produce the content. So you're producing, let's say, your show for your live show on the morning on NBC, right? Does it have to significantly change to be applicable to these other platforms? Is it just about cutting up that juicy bit and, you know, posting it, or a couple, and that either will, if I like that, I'm gonna, you know, dive more and maybe come back to watch what actually happened?
So it's not necessarily the topic itself, because I feel like topics that people care about are the same, whether it's on television or on social networks, but the way we tackle the topic on TV is different from the way we tackle the topic on social media, or sometimes we add some things to the live show that we know will hit on social media. I'll give you an example. In one of the topics, because now I produce Kalam Nawa'im, which is a female talk show, we were discussing makeup, filters, and then we delved a little bit deeper. Who are we really when nobody's looking? So I asked each of the presenters on the show, we got them like a no filter window to carry, and each of them had 30 seconds to just say something without any filter, something that nobody knows about them. If nobody's looking, who are you? And those clippings, I knew as a producer that this will work for TV, but as clippings on Instagram, it will hit, and it did. But it doesn't work every time. It's a trial and error. We're still kind of figuring out this world. Even people on social media, some of their videos hit, and some of them don't get any views or interaction. So it's kind of something at the back of your head. Whenever I'm working on an episode, I want to create content that is valuable, but that people would care about, our target audience, which is women. But our target audience on television is women 25 to 45 or even older. However, our target audience on Instagram is younger. So we try to create something younger for Instagram. So we have like funny short interviews with the anchors on Instagram. It's definitely, you can tell these two things are for different audiences. So sometimes we curate content on television that is social media friendly, but most times we create content specifically for social media that we know will target the audience of social media better. So I hope that answers part of your question.
I think that's a great it's a great example, because so when I'm producing content either for my podcast or so on, I'm not, how do I put this? I don't have, let's say, the time to curate it in different ways. I cut it up and maybe I'll post some here, but whatever I post on one platform is going across to all. And listening to you and doing some research, that example is perfect, because now I get it. I understand. I'm like, okay, so there was the essence of it didn't change, but there were slight tweaks, maybe,
Yeah.
you know, and I think, by the way, great concept for what you just talked about. That's a really, really nice idea.
Thank you.
So,
Like the theme, the
Yeah,
umbrella is the same.
exactly.
But you can curate different things that send out the same message more or less. But you always have to talk to people the way they like to be spoken to, not the way you like to speak. And that's why I feel like when social media regulates, when new media regulates, I really hope that people who are real journalists will be working in these networks, will be influencers more or less, because some people say that, oh, you studied 4 years in university journalism, but now the scene is completely different. No, the scene is different, but the skills are the same, the ethics are the same. You have to be a journalist. I'm not saying you have to have a journalism degree, but you have to have the ethic, you have to have the skills to tell a story. It's a huge responsibility.
yeah, it really is, because what you're saying, you have no idea the impact that could have on a potential viewer. You could either tilt me one way, maybe to something positive, or you could easily tilt me just as evenly to something negative.
Yeah.
So I think, and you mentioned ethics a couple of times, and I think that is something super, super important. And the interesting thing now that I see is a combination of ethics versus impact. And in the sense that, and now with all these shorter form, you know, things like TikTok and stuff, you want that content to be, you know, you want to, it's because maybe 15, 30 seconds, but you want to like hit me straight away, you know, with whatever it is to grab my attention. And I feel maybe sometimes the desire to grab me or make that impact on me straight away can cloud maybe some of the ethics that I should have to tell the story.
If you're looking for clicks, if you're looking for views, if you're looking for fame, you might neglect telling the story properly. So I'm not saying, and I don't want to be unrealistic. If you work in social media, it's your bread and butter, it's how you make money. Yes, you have to get clicks, you have to get views, you have to work with advertisers, you have to post ads. But I feel like a lot of people are losing track of what their message is or what their content is. You can't be trying to sell me something all the time. You just can't. I stop believing you. And you can't sell me 3 different shampoos in the same month telling me they're the best you've ever used. I swear, like, you need to have a strategy. You need to be clear. You need to question yourself. I do believe you can tell a compelling story and get hundreds of thousands of views and still be ethical and still have a positive impact. One example is an account I recently followed. It's called Takhayyal. It's by Tariq Skake. He started with short form videos saying takhayyal, or imagine that 1, 2, 3 happened. So it's usually a piece of information that's not very common that could teach you a lesson. Thought it was interesting. He then added a podcast under takhayyal. So he has a podcast now, and this is the tagline of the show. So he gets guests to tell stories that people don't know about them. Tariq on the show hosts guests that are well known to tell stories about their lives, to delve deeper into their feelings. Yesterday I watched an episode that was heartbreaking, heartwarming. It makes you feel all the right and wrong things at the same time. It was about this author. He wrote a book about his experience, who fell off the stairs, was it, or fell off his building window when he was 12. He was an athlete before, and then he went into the hospital, and everybody told him, you will never be able to not just walk again, but move a finger again. In the beginning of the episode, he walks into the studio, not perfectly, but he was walking. He tells you the story, how he wrote a book, how he started a family. The message behind it is beautiful. It is getting views. It is getting clicks. It is a hit. and it does have value. So yes, you can have value and still get clicks and hits.
Yeah.
But it's harder. It's the harder path.
Yeah.
It's easier to dance on TikTok and get views.
True.
But which path do you want to choose? Depends on you.
Yeah.
And no judgment for people who do it.
To, you know, everyone has their own agenda, their own thing that they're trying to do with their platforms or whatever they want. So, you know, to each their own. But I do support what you're talking about in the sense of, for example, I think we would share a similar vision with our podcast, that whatever we're putting out there, we want it to be, yes, we want it to be valuable, but I think the authenticity of it, at least I think for both of us, that's the most important thing for me. And if at some point I am actually pushing a product on you, it's not going to be in a sneaky way. Like, I'm going to tell you, I'm trying to sell you this.
This is an advertisement.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, straight up. You know, I think transparency is how you build trust, you know, with your audience. I wanted to just piggyback a little bit to your journey at NBC, because you've been a writer, you've been a producer, journalist, presenter, so you've covered all the different aspects. So which, I guess, did you find the most challenging, and which do you genuinely enjoy the most? If I told you, Dana, like, this is what you're going to do and that's it, and you'd be, that's all I need.
I don't want to do one thing.
Fair enough, that's fair.
The most challenging is producing.
Producing, okay.
Because you're leading a team. You have to come up with the main topics. You have to, it's like building blocks. You have to build something that is, you have to have variety, but at the same time it has to be synchronous. Everything has to lead to the next. So scripting an episode and planning an episode this way is very challenging, and every time it's a challenge, because in each topic there's so much to cover. What do you cover about this topic? What is most suitable for your anchors and for your chosen guests? Who do you host to talk about this topic? It's a weekly challenge for me with Kalam Nawa'im, with the show I produce. The content that I like working on the most is the content for my culture segment.
Sure.
So I would love to do this even more often in life. Reading into film, books, what can we learn from them? How similar are they to our lives? Why do we like certain characters? Why do we hate others? This is a topic that I personally love, so I would love to do this more often. Yeah.
And so the culture angle is where that's the kind of stuff that you like to talk.
Because again, as I said in the beginning, culture brings us all together.
Yeah.
No matter who we are, what our beliefs or values are, we can all sit at a round table and discuss a book or a movie and feel similar things.
Yeah. And so culture, so it's interesting as a producer, because I have no experience in the field, so I didn't understand the role of a producer and what it was your job to do, whether it was, and it sounds very challenging, especially, and I'm working with a client now, for example, and we're doing her podcast is a story podcast.
Okay.
And I've listened to story podcasts. My podcast is an interview style, kind of like what we're doing now. So that, and going through this experience with her and learning the amount of planning that we're going into for every single episode is very challenging. And should this be in episode 1 or 2? Are these, have we covered enough points in this one? What's the perfect order? Yeah, what's the perfect order? So I understand how, and it kind of comes back to everything we've been talking about which is storytelling, and how are we going to tell the story? How are you going to...
What's the best way to tell this
Exactly.
story?
And I love what you said earlier, that the truth is subjective, and everyone has their own, and there's 7 billion people, and everyone has their own truth.
And I've made peace with this. Like, there are things that I choose not to believe.
Yeah.
For example, I choose not to believe in conspiracy theories. And when people just start, I have a couple of friends who are so into the conspiracy theories. I'm sure we all have.
Everyone has some of these friends, yeah.
And they keep sending me videos, and I refuse to watch them. I'm like, I choose my truth, and this will not serve me. What if I know? What if it turns out to be true? How's that going to serve me? I choose not to believe in conspiracy theories. because I live a better life, feeling that I have more power over my decisions in my life. So you choose what to believe.
Yeah.
You can never force somebody to believe you or to like you.
Yeah.
And people are judgmental, Khalid.
We are.
I don't know if it's just in our part of the world, but I think it's everywhere. They look at you, they try to guess who you are, where you're from, what's your religion, what could be your political belief, what could be your religious belief. They like to judge, or we as humans, we like to judge because it makes us feel safe in our own skin. I need to know who you are exactly so I can feel safe around you.
Yeah.
So unintentionally, we're judging each other, we're putting each other in boxes, but it just makes us feel safe. So all journalists or content creators should stop trying to please everyone, because you will never please everyone. And there are people who will hate you or will not listen to your show or watch your content, not because your content is not good, because they don't like you. They don't like what you represent. They don't like the way you look, because you look like you're from, I don't know, X or Y or Z. So.
I think that is such a great thing to remember, because, so for example, with my podcast, it's video as well. So getting used to the video aspect of that never bothered me. But now because I've been fighting for so long, I'm like, to not have to join this social media like thing to build your brand, to get exposure, to do all of these things. It doesn't feel authentic to me. I'm gonna do it because I'm doing it because I have to do it, not necessarily because I want to do it. Maybe this will change in the future once I get more comfortable with it. But what you were talking about earlier about the judgment part, I think that is that's where my insecurity comes from, is that logically I'm very aware of it, and I could sit down with someone and be like, yeah, do this, do that, whatever. But then it's me and I'm like, I don't know. And it's weird because I have a video podcast. So it's not that I haven't been in front of the camera. It's not that it's something new to me, but to make this commitment to khalas, like I have to do this and do it well and improve is, I guess, something that I've been struggling with. And I think that's what a lot of content creators, when they first start out, I think struggle with that, what's that word? That imposter syndrome, so to speak.
Yes.
So I wanted to ask you, so it's interesting because you've been in the media world for a while, and now you have your own podcast, Ahadith Tishbahna, right? So I'm curious, now that you're doing your own podcast, or I know you've been doing it for about a year, when you first started out, did you have any of those, I guess, typical feelings someone would have when they first start out? Because you have so much experience in that arena, I'm curious if you felt some of those things when you first started out with your show. And also we'd love to hear, what is your show? What's the aim of it? Let us all know.
It was definitely a scary experience.
Okay, interesting.
Because a podcast is mainly audio. And I've been working in television. And in television, you learn the opposite lesson, that your visuals should speak out more than what you say.
Interesting.
So in television, when you're telling a story, you have to imagine that the audience have the TV on mute, and you have to compel them to unmute with the visuals, with the story you're telling. It has to be compelling enough for somebody to unmute. With a podcast, it's mainly audio, although I have a video podcast, but I know that podcasts are mainly audio.
Yeah.
So telling a story just with your voice, your facial expressions are not showing. It's just your voice, no body language, nothing. So it was a challenge. And I remember, and I will tell you a little bit about my podcast in a bit. After I filmed the first 3 episodes, I never watched them. I always listened to them so that I can independently judge, was this story told in a good way? Did I put enough effort in my tone, in the way I speak? And I found a lot of mistakes, and I started working on them, because we're all a work in progress. all these years in television, as I said, you're used to having visuals that accompany what you say. So I did work really hard on focusing on the way I sound, focusing on my voice. I was lucky to be in television for all these years because I did train myself a lot to work on my voice. My voice was not like this when I first started. You learn to speak from your tummy, not from your nose. You learn how to breathe properly, how to section your sentences so that you never stop where it doesn't make sense. So I had all of this, which is great, but just working on audio itself, this was something that I worked hard on. حديث تشبهنا, or You Can Relate, is a podcast. In every episode, we host a different guest to discuss. We're not discussing the book, the movie, or the painting, or the documentary per se, but we're trying to always relate this content, the book, the movie, or the series, whatever it is, to our lives. So in one of the episodes, we discussed the series You. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with it. It's about this psychopath that falls in love with a different girl every season and then ends up killing them. We discussed people who are obsession, the idea of obsession, being obsessed. Why do people love bad characters sometimes on television? His name is Joe, I think, on the show. And there was a campaign on Twitter. People did not want him to get caught. It's kind of scary, like liking a criminal. Yeah. So we did discuss this. What is an obsession? Psychological trauma. Why do we like bad characters sometimes? Why could a lot of people relate to Joe, although they wouldn't do what he's done? So every episode tries to take the media text to a different perspective, to make it more relatable to anyone. Even if you haven't seen the movie or the series or read the book, you can listen to the show. It will not burn it for you, but at the same time, it will open up a conversation that can relate to you, your life, your decisions, your feelings.
That's I love that idea as a concept for a show, by the way. That's it's really, really smart because
thank you.
I like how it's not about what it is, in the sense that like that piece of work,
because a lot of people do this.
We can sit down,
critics and analysts,
exactly,
who have better experience than me,
and me too. I like that you extract the topic, the learning or the underlying thing, and have a discussion about that. First of all, I think as a listener, that's way more interesting because I can always go watch the show if I want it. Exactly. So I love that angle, and it's interesting. There's so many things you were talking about in terms of how you learn how to speak through all these years of television, like speaking from here and that. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, man, I've done a podcast for 3 years. I haven't thought about any of these things. So I probably should, because it probably will improve how even I present myself and how I do the show. But it's really interesting how that transition from TV and what you said is something I never thought of. You have to imagine someone's watching you on mute, and I'm like, that's so interesting to think about and to try to cater towards, and compared to how you transition to a podcast. And even though, like you said, we both have video podcasts, but I think there's something I've learned, at least in my experience, there's something about the voice, like your voice. You cannot hide who you are on a podcast, not only as a host, but also as a guest, because it's also long form. Maybe in something more visual, I could play around with that a little bit, but with a podcast, it's really authentic. It's who you are. And I think, personally, I think that's why so many people want to do that now, because now you have a platform to truly show, through speaking to it, whether it's yourself, whether it's a story, or with guests, to truly show who you are. What would you say?
Yeah, I totally agree. I remember, and it's about always trying to showcase a different perspective. This is also one of the main things I focus on. So most episodes I have guests, but I do some solo episodes, and there's this episode that's kind of my favorite from the solo episodes, where I discuss Camilla, who is at the King's Consul today. And I go back in time to what we know about Camilla. Since we were kids, we hated her because she is the woman that ruined Lady Diana's life. And our sympathy has always been with Lady Diana. And there are countless documentaries and series and articles that have been written about Lady Diana and King Charles and what happened, So we've always hated Camilla. And in this episode, I discussed the other woman syndrome. Nobody thinks about her, how she feels, how she must have felt all these years. I researched parts of the story that were unknown to people, like how they met, how they fell in love, what happened after the wedding, the amount of bullying she had to endure silently. She chose to remain silent for 20 years. I'm not saying she's a good or a bad person. I'm just trying to tell people there might be something there. We were all brought up loving Diana, and I still love her. But why not look at the other woman's perspective? So I think a podcast is the perfect platform to kind of showcase these interesting perspectives that may not have a place in television or other platforms.
It makes what I love about podcasts and why I started mine and why I still listen to them daily, like 2 or 3 a day. I just have it on while I'm doing my work. I'm a very curious person. I love learning. Like, I like listening to something in a podcast that while someone's saying it, I have this like this voice in my head going, oh shit, that's pretty, I never thought of it like that. I didn't know that, whatever. And it's just access to endless amounts of information from whoever I would want to. And I love that, kind of like what you were talking about, great episode idea. That is just bringing at, just also, what about this? It's just that.
And I'm not enforcing my opinion on you. I'm just telling you there's another side to the story.
Yeah, let's talk about that side. Since this is the side that everyone talks about. Dana, this has been such a fantastic conversation.
Thank you.
I've really, really enjoyed it. We have a closing question on the show that we ask all our guests. So the aim with this podcast is to show that, number one, learning never stops and success comes in many forms. So if I ask you the question, looking back, at your life or your career, whatever comes to mind, if I ask you, what is something you learned, or we call it the game changer learning, that just shattered that perspective you had on, it doesn't have to be life, but on maybe a subject, an idea, what would that be?
I really like the concept because I just posted a picture on Instagram and I shared my favorite quote, a quote that I live by. In Arabic it says, بِعْ ذَكَاءَكَ وَاشْتَرِ الْحِيرَةَ. Sell your intelligence and buy wandering and wondering. Live a life of wondering, because if you are so confident that you're intelligent and that you know everything, you will never learn, you will never be open to listen to other people. So this is something that I live by. Something that I learned throughout my experience. Okay, it's something related to our personal relationships. Don't try to make everybody like you, because you will lose track of who you are, and some people will never like you no matter what. I used to be a people pleaser. I used to like it when everybody likes me, when everybody smiles back. But you live and you learn that some people will not like you anyways, and you're jeopardizing who you are, your identity, sometimes your rights, just for people to like you. What if they do? What if they don't? How's that going to affect you and your path? So this is just one piece of advice. Never, ever try to be a people pleaser. It is okay if some people don't like you. It is okay if they talk about you behind your back. That's not gonna be the end of the world.
Yeah.
And it's only normal. It's a human nature. So keep walking your path. You do you, and let them be.
I think you said it. I think you do you just sums it.
You do you.
You do you. I think that's a beautiful way to live your life, and a beautiful way to end the show. I think all of us in our lives everyone can relate to that at some point or another in their life until something changed. So I think a lot of people will resonate with that. Dana, I wanted to say thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for sharing with us, your time and your knowledge. And I think anyone looking into maybe going into the industry or is maybe an influencer in a different way.
Everybody's in the industry today.
It seems that way.
Wallah.
If people want to connect with you, reach out, how can we, get in touch?
Definitely. My Instagram account is public at Dana Abullaban. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. Watch my podcast. Listen to my podcast. My podcast is on YouTube and it's on all podcast platforms as well. Hadith Bishbahna. I want you to listen to the podcast and tell me what you think.
I will.
Thank you.
Dana, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the AUD podcast channel. We really hope that you enjoyed it and learned something from it. We have a lot of incredible guests lined up for you on the show, and we're so excited to bring you their inspiring stories. To stay up to date with all the latest episode releases, please make sure to like, share, follow, and subscribe to the podcast on the AUD Instagram page at AUD Dubai.